Okay, hi, this is Ray Lutz with Citizens Oversight. I want to welcome everybody who's on the call. This is a conference call for the election integrity email list. And let me just mute everybody and leave myself on. Okay, good. And so what we wanted to try to do is review this really good paper that was put out from the Stanford Law School about vote by mail, since it's really coming up as one of the hot topics. Oh, hi, Mimi. Welcome aboard. And let me share my my screen so we can all be watching. So essentially, this is just recently published from the Stanford Law School Law and Policy Lab about the vote by mail situation, and it's really a good document. It's pretty involved, but I thought we'd just touch on some of the kind of interesting and almost some of them are somewhat counterintuitive in terms of some of the things that they came up with, and maybe they are intuitive if we look at it enough. But essentially, they did mostly a survey and tried to find out what was going on in California. It was not looking exactly at comparison of signatures or things like that, but they did take a look at how the counties are dealing with it from an administrative and process standpoint. And they also, as part of this, which I thought was pretty interesting, just skipping down here, they have a whole bunch of actual envelopes that were used in the vote by mail. And one thing I thought was kind of interesting is a lot of them have a security flap where when they get it, when you sign it, this flap goes over your signature, okay? And then when it's in the mail, no one can see it. And then when they get there, in this case, they pull this little tab and essentially reveal what the signature is. That's one way to do it. They have another one here where a lot of them don't do anything. I know they don't do anything in San Diego in terms of trying to give you any kind of privacy of your signature. But another one, I guess it's before that one, has a different kind of a flap that covers it over. I guess that's the one I was looking for. So the way it works is the voter seals this longer flap over the signature section, and they don't have to open the envelope completely to take a look at it. They just pull this little perforated tab off of that. It seems like it'd be a lot of work to look at the signature, but apparently they're doing that. And this is the county of Calaveras. So it's a small county. It's not one of the major huge counties that would have a super high volume, but that I thought was pretty interesting. So let's go back up and kind of go over the summary here. And of course, we're reviewing this big picture because we know that vote by mail is going to need to be a seriously adopted option in this age of COVID-19. The pandemic might be quite active in the fall. And what we found in our discussions, though, amongst various experts that have been looking at the talking about different states, is that unlike California, which is what this document is about, the other states, say Connecticut, I know I talked to Luther about his situation because he's an expert in Connecticut, and he said that they do they would have a hard time, adopting, full vote by mail. But there may be a way to just, in those areas, make the absentee, no excuse absentee more prevalent and so forth. So there's a lot of negotiating that would need to be done in those areas. But the key findings here was, and they broke this out into hiring and training. Let's skip down here to the automated systems. What they're finding is as they tend to do the Voters' Choice Act. Now, the Voters' Choice Act means that the voters can, basically, it means we're going to be pushing vote by mail really hard. The Voters' Choice Act means that a lot more people will be getting vote by mail than not. And it means that they're also utilizing DMV records for getting the signatures. And as they were using this Voters' Choice Act, which was pushing it toward, as I said, even a greater adoption of vote by mail, then they tend to shift for more automation, especially in those larger counties. And that a lot of them are using automatic signature scanners. Of course, usually when the ballots come in, say in San Diego, which is the #2 county in California, pretty large, they scan all of the front of all of these envelopes and bring that into their workstation so that the operators can take a look at the signatures and compare it with the other ones that they have on file. Really, if you have a very big county, you need to have this type of automation. Those areas of the country that are not used to doing vote by mail, I've watched them do it. They just they take a look at the signature by hand. It's just, there's no way you could do a vast number of these and do them that way. So that's actually a big issue. It sounds like it'd be, yeah, of course we're going to use automatic signature scanners, but these parts of the country that are not used to doing vote by mail, this is what they're not going to have. They're not going to have this automation to help them do this. So the criteria for verifying the signatures seem to be pretty diverse in terms of what they actually used. There is, as they say here, limited statewide uniform criteria, meaning really none, in terms of standards for signature verification, what counts and what doesn't. I haven't seen anything that says, this is the way you're going to do it. It is, I think, pretty much just whatever they want to implement, and it'd be something I'd be interested in seeing if there is any standards there.
Colorado has a standard.
So
and it's mentioned in the document.
Colorado, yeah. Well, Colorado is nice because they have a pretty much a statewide stand. They follow the sort of a statewide authority. And in California, unfortunately, we have these 58 little fiefdoms that do whatever they want. And unfortunately, also the Secretary of State here has not really implemented standards. But yeah, so that'd be good to, maybe we could get those and take a look at what the signatures matching standards are in Colorado, and those might be good to take a look at, and then maybe if they're really good, try to push those out and say here's the standard. I know they did talk about up here the training that the California Association of Clerks and Elections Officials plays an important role in coordinating training opportunities. I don't even know if they really do very much of this. I know that they operate somewhat as a lobbying group for the election officials. And they have little sort of junkets where they go out and they go to some fun place to go. But I don't know how good their training really is. So let's get down here a little bit more. Here's one of the issues that we did talk about, is that many of the county registrars expressed concern about the challenges posed by low resolution digital signatures collected by the DMV. And I noticed this when I went in to get my license renewed. They have you sign on a little, with your finger on a tablet, and you really can't, you know, create your regular signature that way at all. And it's usually a really bad signature that they're collecting there. And this is something that if they're going to be using these signatures to qualify who you are, they've got to have equipment that can collect them better than this. So that'd be one of the issues that I know needs to be dealt with. Let's see what else. And they are sometimes, I know now, since they have the DMV signatures, they have usually the DMV, maybe a couple of recent elections to compare with. Any, usually, at least in San Diego, they have a number of different signatures to take a look at to see if they can compare it. And then there's the issue that we were discussing kind of at length before about trying to observe these things. And this is going to come into play during this COVID-19, because really having people stand behind you in close proximity and try to look at the screen is really going to be difficult. And, you know, they say close elections tend to attract party representatives to observe the signature matching. And it's going to be difficult, and especially since they may just opt to say, okay, well, we don't think that we want any observation at all, or we can't have it. And we talked about, there was some discussion, and I guess it was Lynn from North Carolina was sending around some links, so they didn't work for me, that would allow you to watch the signature verification on your screen. And to what resolution, I didn't get to see it, so I didn't know. But this is kind of going to be probably, in terms of providing oversight from the public, this is going to be a big challenge with the era of COVID-19 to try to watch this signature comparison process. And some interesting things here about notifying a voter of mixed match signature that I was kind of surprised with. So they have this new set of requirements, which is the this EVCA, which is I mentioned before. It's not the voters. Yeah, it's the Voters' Choice Act. And what it did was it said that you need to notify the voter if the signature doesn't match, and by mail. And some of these places were already notifying with other methods, and such as using email or phone or maybe even Facebook or SMS text messaging. And so some counties have actually reduced, oh, here's where it says, they've reduced their notification measures after the passage of this act, interpreting the act as prescribing the USPS mail as the only method. But the interesting thing was, and I guess we'll see this a bit later in the document if you have time, is that they found that actually notifying by mail worked the best, even though there was these other methods. The counties that just did mail notification had the highest cure rates. And why that is, it's kind of, I was a bit stunned by the fact that that these other methods didn't really work, that they weren't better. I'd be curious to really look into that to see why that came out. It's counterintuitive. So in terms of remedying, you can do it by mail, but you know, and then they're experimenting with fax. The EVCA requires counties to use all three remedy: email and or fax to remedy the signature. I haven't actually looked at that, how they do it by email and stuff. That's interesting. And so we did look in the last call or two. Harvey Branscombe did bring in the letters that he was saying he was pretty actually happy with, the ones being used in San Diego in terms of notifying people and getting their signature to be cured. So then they have this survey, and they use that as data for their for this paper. And this is interesting. Use of entirely vote by mail elections actually decreased the overall rejection rate, while using automated technology without human review increase the rejection rate. So I guess we'll see a chart about that, so make more sense in a second. It's kind of depends on if they were using these automated methodologies or not. And then they have some recommendations. Of course, voters should make sure that their information is correct and that they should execute it correctly. And they have some ideas for asking voters, for example, to provide multiple samples of their signature during the registration and remedy process. That would be good. And people don't always know that the signature that they put on their registration form is going to be one that is going to be, used to compare their ballot. And that would be nice. I know on the voter registration form, it doesn't actually say, sign here carefully. This is the one that we're going to match to the vote by mail ballot. And they did mention that earlier in this list that the small counties tend to actually kind of know their voters and what their signatures look like, and do a lot better job of checking them. They say they want to explore these email or e-notification technologies, but as I said, it's funny that these didn't seem to be working too well, and I'm wondering why that is. So here's what they're saying, that the Secretary of State should develop and publish a set of signature verification guidelines. I have got to say that I've been disappointed for many years about how bad the Secretary of State has done, and continues to do badly, and in terms of setting standards, and even if they say set a standard, they never do it. And they're supposed to set standards and they don't do it. So, and it's a little bit too much to ask for the legislature to try to set standards on how you do signature matching. That's a little bit too fine detailed for them to be able to do it. So maybe there's a way that we or other activist groups can get together to try to push this and get signature verification guidelines that have adopted by the state, and then everybody follows. And then we know, okay, here's how it's going to be done when we're watching it as well. And then let's see, working down here. Here's I think this thing of at the DMV, if they're going to be collecting these signatures at the DMV and using them to validate your identity in terms of for voting, people need to know that this is important. I think also not using one of these electronic pads or some way to improve your ability to sign it, because using the pad with one of those, either your fingertip, which is horrible, or the end of a thing. So that is, I think we can make headway there. Then they're saying in terms of legislation, they want to get county election agencies to send voters a second follow-up remedy letter if the first letter is not returned within a week. Now that's really pushing out the timeline. If you're going to have to send it out, notice that the signature is in there, send a letter. If it's not returned in a week, then send another letter. Now you're pushing this out to, many weeks before you even get the acknowledgement that they've got the signature done. But that second letter seems to have a big effect. And of course, publishing the policies. I think as people start to know, they'll get I think as people get used to using vote by mail, then they're going to do a better job of getting the signature done well, and included, getting that part done. And then we have some other things here that are not that important, but let's move on down. Signature guidelines, and then they have some conclusions, but mainly they have a pretty good chart here of the rise of vote by mail, which I can put up. In California, since 2004, it went from about 35% up to now well above 60%, close to about 70% of the total percent of the total number of ballots. And so people like it, and it's a little bit more complex than the regular process. So that's why we're going to have to really continue to focus on it, especially in this age of the COVID-19. And they talk about the signing process. You can read this on your own. I really encourage you to study this whole document. The map of the counties and by size, and that means population. So you can see LA, which is the largest county by far, which is 3 times larger than San Diego, number 2, and about 5 times larger than Orange County. And those are the top 3. And so it's really heavily in, plus these are bigger counties at the bottom. And then you have also some heavily populated counties in the Bay Area, but these are smaller. So on the whole, if you actually looked at this, the Bay Area probably is pretty heavily weighted as well. But in our work, we tend to take a look at the top 24 counties and exclude the other 34, and pretty much says here 10, 11, 12. So the ones that are colored here are pretty much about the top 24, and they account for 92% of the voters. So it's although San Bernardino is one of the ones in our area that we take a look at. It's included. So essentially, though, these other ones, and one of the ones up in here has only 1 precinct, so it's very small. So it is a very widely, has a huge diversity of different populations. So what they did, though, in their study here is they essentially had teams of students reaching out to the 58 counties and then conducted interviews. That's really what they did. Okay, so they also looked at materials and other things, but this is not a kind of a study where they actually went in and watched it or anything of that nature. But they may have done some of that too. And then they looked at this requirements now for notification and remedy, and how that's being done. The remedying, they have some discussion of that. Here's a picture of a person looking through ballots and looking at the screen. I don't actually see them doing this part of looking through ballots to do this. That's typically, that must be in a much smaller county than what we do here. And this appears to be the one that has a little tab that you can pull off. So a little hard to say. Here's a signature on the envelope right there.
This is what provisional processing in San Diego looks like. Tens of thousands days and days and days of work, rooms full of people
But
going
are
through
they,
paper
are they,
envelopes and looking at the screen like that.
they are looking at, oh, okay. All right. So this is, but this is not how they're doing the vote by mail, is it, Harvey?
For the most part, except for exceptions, I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. Most of it's electronic, but there is a stage at which they go look at the paper. In fact, the one I watched 2 days before certification, they were actually going through stacks of envelopes. Yep.
It looks like it's Utah County, and that is, oh yeah, Utah elections official. Similar to those found in California county. So this is not even in California. It must have been a picture that they found that would be useful to put in there, even though it's not from California.
Ray, I've seen that process in LA County with outer absentee mail ballot signatures and a computer screen where they have.
So they're going through them by hand, looking at the actual envelopes like that?
They were in this case, and I assume it was because it was rejected by the automated signature matching. I'm pretty much, that's what I think. I saw people.
Okay, you cut out there, Mimi. You got
There were several rows, as I remember, of people doing this. I stood over the shoulder of one person doing it, and she was looking at the signature on the purple envelope, and she was looking up at her computer screen that had the signature. That's what I remember. She may have been passing it under some sort of infrared scanner as well to see if she had a match according to the scanner, but she was also eyeballing it. And I have seen that process. Unfortunately, she was working, so I wasn't able to ask, hey, are you approving that? I think she was approving all the ones that I saw her do instead of rejecting, because it felt like it was the second time the envelope had been through it.
You know,
I just keep saying I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, the big problem I see with this is that it's very hard to review what's been done. You know, it would be so much nicer if we had the you know, the signature on the ballot somehow captured, and then be able to compare it with the other ones in some sort of a process where the public can review that. Because if you're just looking at them here and just comparing to the screen, and then it's, unless you go back through the envelopes again, then you can do it.
It's interesting that there seem to be several signatures on this screen. In LA, there was only one, and I do believe it was off the registration card. I registered in LA in 1979. I can't even imagine whether my signature matches what that one was. And my ears perked up when you said that after motor voter DMV, there's possibly, at least as often as you renew your license, the DMV might be sending or registering with the registrar the most recent DMV signature, as opposed to something that the same voter might have done 3 decades ago. I'd like to know the answer to that question, because to me, the biggest problem here, it looks like a bunch of different names.
Well, this is what you know, that's a good point, is that knowing how they're doing it. Now I'm looking at this and I'm seeing the signature on the signature box seems to match this style of this one. These other signatures don't look anything like it at all.
Right.
And I would say completely different person if at first glance.
I have watched this in a bunch of different places. It's very common to see multiple reference signatures on the screen at one time. Very difficult to observe because you can't tell which signature they're actually looking at. The DMS system, which is referred to as DIMS, which is apparently now owned by Runbeck, that was previously owned by ES&S, that's being used in San Diego and in Los Angeles, I believe. That does show 4 pairs of signatures on the screen, a reference and a sample from the envelope for 4 different voters, and they skip from screen to screen 4 at a time, and it's very difficult to watch that. They, in the first stage of the human verification, they don't have the paper envelope in front of them. In San Diego, they rarely do have until they actually go through several different steps of rejection before they actually send a cure letter. In San Diego, on 2 days before certification, I was watching them do the final decision on the ones that were about to be rejected. And they had already received the cure letter, but the cure letter hadn't been responded to. So they were making one more try to approve all of those, even though the cure letter had gone out and hadn't come back yet. And in that case, they can look at the paper, but in the instance I was watching, the provisionals are being looked at. There were certain ones that were being looked at on paper, but primarily they were being looked at on the screen only. In Colorado, by the way, you will see dozens, perhaps, of reference signatures on that screen before they reject an envelope. And that's because every signature from every envelope that's come back from every election since they started recording them is available to those verifiers. And so the people who've been voting the longest, they may spend minutes looking through a whole bunch of different signatures, some of which may be very different, because it could be that somebody wasn't the voter, actually signed one of the envelopes somewhere along the line. But that can also be the reference they'll choose to use to compare and match and approve the ballot for voting. So that's the reality of signature verification. And what you're seeing in that picture is a small county where they will always start with the paper in hand. And they'll just be looking at in Colorado, it would be the statewide voter registration database. In California, it would be the DIMS or the DFM, or whatever the other one is. They're two competing private companies that are providing the election management system in California.
Harvey, are you saying that when you say there's 4 reference signatures from the same voter at a time?
No, not 4, many. Not 4, many. There could be one
voter.
from a recent voter. There'll only be one. And
okay,
that may be the motor voter signature signed on a tablet, which is extremely different than anything that they would sign on paper. And that does cause a big problem. Certainly causes a problem in California and in Colorado. And that's because they don't resemble the pen on paper type signatures. Now, the verifiers have gotten pretty good at matching up characteristics in those broad, thick font things that come from tablets. And they're amazing. It amazes me sometimes when you get a chance to talk to somebody who's doing it. And you get a chance to do that if you go to the final review in San Diego, where the registrar is making the decision. And he's got the people from the campaigns, and so whoever's interested is in the room. People who had actually put in challenges to signatures are in there, and they have an opportunity to discuss with the registrar what they thought, why they thought the signature should have been rejected, or you actually never see challenges of approvals, which is strange in my opinion, but you definitely see challenges of rejections. And then the registrar will explain which curve in which character was the one that actually he thinks actually matches, which allows him to use what's the phrase that he uses? It's it's not substantial compliance. It's another one of those phrases where they are like construe liberally, liberal construction. That's what it is, liberal construction of the law. So to allow the ballots to be approved. And it's a fascinating experience to be there, listening to that conversation and looking at the signatures. And in this case, because of COVID, we're actually holding the envelopes, because we definitely were looking at the paper at that point, the paper envelope with the ballot inside, and deciding whether those were going to get counted. And that was 3 days before certification. So last chance for those envelopes. In fact, all of the ones that were discussed got counted in the one I was at in this election.
So we can safely say that in almost no case that you've seen or know about, a signed mail ballot envelope is being compared to only one signature?
There are many cases in California where that's the case.
Okay. And
that's because California limits the master signature to a registration form. And in the case of motor voter, there's not even a registration form. There's only a printout of the data that was collected, by computer at the time they registered. And there is the signature from the pad. So exactly all they work with is the signature from the pad in that case. In the case of paper registrations, they have a form which has got a lot of printing on it, such as the name, address, and the dates and so forth. And they can actually compare those characters to the signature also. And if the signature happens to be a printed name, they can actually match up the printed name. And I watched that happen with the registrar, looking at the characters on the registration form. And he admitted that voters who registered by motor voter don't have that opportunity, because there is no signature, printed character samples in that case. So there's a lot of different treatment of different voters that's systematic. That's part of the side effects of the design of the system. It's really fascinating, actually.
If I could jump in there, because, you know, I know Runbeck is out of Arizona, and how we do it in Arizona and other states is really interesting, is that our signature is on the outside of the envelope. When it goes through the Pitney Bow, it takes a picture of that. Now, that's what they use to verify, and the machine has the option of saying, yeah, I matched it, it's good. But if they flunk it, it has to go to a human being. And that human being is not looking at an envelope in Maricopa County. They're on a computer screen, and Runbeck, who receives the vote by mail because they're out of Phoenix, puts it through the Pitney Bow, takes that picture, sends them the picture to go ahead and verify, okay? So what are you verifying? You're verifying a picture of a picture, okay? And you know, that is where, you know, in a court case 4 years ago when I sued the state of Arizona, okay, is that we had witnesses come in and they had the Department of Traffic put up their voter registration signature, and it turned out what they used was the picture of a driver's license signature, claiming, well, didn't you change your registration 2 years ago? And the guy said, no. Well, isn't that your signature? And we finally realized that was his signature 10 years before. They were still using it. And so what I'm saying is that there could be games played because of the voter database. They know that if you left Arizona, that you moved to New York, you registered, that there could be possibly ballot harvesting, ballot stuffing going on. And this is really an awful important process. And like I said, you're taking a picture of a picture, okay? That's what they're verifying in a lot of counties. Now, Pima County, they actually use the envelopes, even though Runbeck mailed them out for us, okay? And so I feel better when it's done the way Pima County does it, but the way Maricopa does it, I'm concerned.
Yeah, so what you're saying, it describes what's going on in California and in Colorado. And by the way, Runbeck and Pitney Bowes are two different competing vendors for the scanner sorter devices. Yes. And Bell and Howell is a third one. And they, both Pitney and Bell and Howell, changed their name or spun off into different companies. I forget the names now. And it is true that what fascinates me, what you just said, is that maybe Runbeck is actually operating the Agilis, which is their brand name for their sorter, outside the election facility and at their facility, which would be...
They're running it at their facility at Runbeck. They mail it out, they receive it, and then what they approve, because the computer says it was good, gets sent. What doesn't, they physically have to check the picture only.
Right.
They never see amazing. The original signature.
That couldn't happen in Colorado, although we do use, some counties use Runbeck, and Runbeck is very popular in Colorado. That's by far the biggest supplier of the sorter in Colorado.
Well, you know, 4 years ago, I did a study on California on the presidential primary. And it looks to me that somebody gamed the system because Hillary on the front end won the vote by mail by 26. And at the end, when the final balance, and that means the Pitney Bow, you know, listen, they know how you're voting on a presidential. You donate money. The databases are incredible. They know if you like anchovies on your pizza. I mean, it's incredible the amount of data these people have now. And you know, I saw it in San Diego in a video that I found there that the lady said, if you requested a vote by mail ballot and we mailed you one and you claim that you didn't get it and it does come in, the machine automatically will know to take that first ballot, segregate it, and put it in the special bin because they have the voter database tied to the Pitney Bow in San Diego.
Okay? Yeah,
it's live.
Of course, that's how the sorter gets the signature, is from the database, which Colorado, it's the statewide voter registration database. And yes, those sorter scanners are connected to the internet from time to time, if not all the time. And yes, they are not certified by the EAC. There is no rigorous or any kind of standard actually for their manufacture or operation. They do not produce audit logs. I've been insisting that the counties that are buying these things ask for audit logs so that it'll be possible to actually check what happened with any given signature. When was it actually when was it actually approved or not? Was it challenged first and then approved? And how long did the election official, the worker, spend studying it before they actually approved it or denied it? Because those are the kinds of metadata you'd like to use to review. And I'm proposing that citizens should be able to review those decisions just like they get a chance to look at ballots being interpreted, or we hope they are actually. In Colorado, they are. In Colorado, we have the allowance for watching the signature verification, but there's very little practical possibility of any kind of challenge. And I'm the one who would know because I'm the only one who's actually tried to challenge signatures in Colorado. And I did challenge 2 in San Diego, by the way, as well. Didn't work out too well.
Okay,
But
so
it's a really, yeah, it's a very interesting topic. If you take a look at the email I sent out just before this call started, I have a whole series of recommendations of my own about how to improve signature verification and cure, most of which are not on the law thing from Stanford.
that is a good point that was being made about no audit logs and so forth for these things, and I'm glad you brought that up. Mimi, I see your hands up. Do you want to say something?
So would something that should be demanded be that these sorter scanners, it sounds like there's only 2 big companies so far doing 3, that they submit their machinery for certification, emergency?
Yes, so that, what the problem with that is, or the reason it's not happening is because the voting system definition is everything tabulation only. It's not about eligibility. So including our ballot marking device also is off of it, but everything about eligibility determination, including computers that are matching signatures, those are not part of the voting system. Therefore, they are not under the jurisdiction of the EAC.
Yeah, in fact, the hand marked paper ballot is something that I asked them. I said, why don't you have any rules or guidelines for hand marked paper ballots instead of machine marked? And they don't even that isn't something that they include within the scope of voting equipment. It has to be electronic equipment that they're certifying, and it's beyond the idea of a pen. Because there are things that are important with how these ballots should be formatted, how they, what the look of them should be, whether they're easy to read or not, whether the bubbles on the left or the right, et cetera. Right. So those are things that they don't even get into at all, and that's the crazy thing.
But there's a huge public movement whose principle is elements of voter suppression that could be engineered to support that recommendation, because it's an instrument of voter suppression. And if you don't certify it or look at it, then you've essentially allowed voter suppression in the dark. That's what we're talking about here.
Right. So,
but I don't think that movement doesn't know about this.
It's a huge hazardous area. Now let me move along to Tim White. Have your hand up. Go ahead and make your comment.
In Washington, the Secretary of State is authorized by the legislature to approve automatic signature verification, but has not approved any, which means in Washington, every signature on every ballot is eyeball checked by people, 1.3 million in King County voters. Everyone is checked by eyeball by people trained by the State Patrol. Another reason, in the larger counties, they also, like in Arizona, they take a picture of the incoming signature and they make the comparison on a screen, picture to picture, like John was talking about.
Right.
Another reason you can have multiple signatures on the screen is if there is a mismatch, they can bring up the signatures of any other voters at that same address. It's not unusual in a home for the envelopes and the blank ballots to get mixed up between partners or kids or parents or housemates. And so they check to see if someone else in that household's signature is on that ballot, and they will accept it.
And that's a nice thing. Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things that I found difficult with this whole area is I haven't been able to bring in my camera and video record what they do because they won't let me do that. It's invasion of privacy of watching those signatures go by. And so in terms of showing people, like, here's how it's done, I just don't have that. And I wanted to bring up this point of the document. regarding the role of observers, which is important for us citizens in order to make sure that we understand what's going on. It says some counties allow extensive observer participation. Observers can issue challenges to signatures that trigger a second round of verification. And they mentioned Riverside, Santa Clara, San Luis, and Orange. And at least one medium-sized county does not allow observers to view the signature verification segment of election processing at all, citing privacy concerns. Now that worries me, you know, that you're not allowed to watch it at all. Between expansive and zero is a third group that allow observers to challenge the process as it's being conducted, but not individual signatures. And then they, of course, some of these places wanted to limit the observer's role so that they did not have any, each instance, you know, would take, that they would have to deal with. They want to reduce that. So it's been, I want to just mention a couple more things here, which is the rejection rate and rejections for signature mismatch. The overall rejection rate, and this appears to be not percentages, but fractions. So it'd be, I don't know if that's 2.3% or if that's 0.023%. That probably is 2.3% versus 0.023, but I'm not sure. The probably 2.3%. I don't know if you have any Harvey Brands.
2.3% is typical. Yes, that in fact, my observation is that they're developing standards, expectations about how much is tolerable, how much of the rejection rate is tolerable, and they tend to adjust the parameters of the process to try to achieve that. And if they start seeing too much at rejecting, they'll try to loosen it up, and too little, they'll try to tighten it up somehow. So the 3% sounds more typical.
Yeah, and so so that's two. This is a fraction of, so it's 2.3% is what the total of the average of these different years here. And it's ranged pretty widely from 3.6, 6.1, 2.7, and a pretty wide standard deviation as well. Signature mismatch percentage. Percentage now. This is a rate, here's a percentage. So the percentage, 0.257%. That otherwise it would be 25.7%. It must be 0.257%. I wonder why they're rejecting at 2.3% when the signature mismatch is quite a bit, 10 times lower than that. Frankly, I didn't quite understand what this.
Isn't that, it's a quarter of the reason that vote by mails are rejected is because it doesn't signature match. That must mean that there's 3/4 of a reason of perhaps not voting, not a registered voter in the county, or dead. We know they're dead and someone voted their ballot.
It's typically no signature and then signature discrepancy are the two. In Colorado, we have no ID with the ballot, which is needed if nobody's ever physically looked at the signature of the voter before, which happens if you register online. Then you have to submit a copy of your ID with the ballot the first time you vote. So those are 3 possible ways of being rejected.
So they must have, this must be, because if you don't say percentage and then show a rate like this, which is, so you're saying you think, Mimi, this is 25.7%.
Is a signature mismatch and the other ballots rejected for other reasons. That would be my guess, because they're doing percentage of what was rejected overall.
In California.
Hi, this is Harvey Wasserman.
Yeah.
Are you going to go till 12:30, or what's your time frame here? I mean, 1:30. What time do you want to end?
Well, it'd be nice to end at 1, but what would you like
All right.
to
Well,
do?
let me just. Well, the problem that we're facing here, we have a national call tomorrow at 5. I think I would urge everybody on this call to email me at solartopia@gmail, and I'll put you on the list for tomorrow's call. What we're looking at here, you're this report, which I looked through, is about California, which has a history of vote by mail. What we're looking at in the fall is a number of states that are going to do it for the first time. They also, a lot of these states have deadlines by which the count must be in, which was a factor in Florida last time, where they stole basically a governor's and a Senate seat because they came down on the clock on getting the votes counted.
Yeah.
What you're going to have if those deadlines aren't lifted in places like North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, which are going to be doing big vote by mail for the first time, you're going to have people sitting in warehouses trying to social distance, and they're going to be going through all this torturous process. Nobody knows what's going to happen in terms of disqualification of the votes and for signatures and other situations, except we do know that there will be people in there on the Trump payroll. They're going to know who they want to eliminate.
Yeah.
So, it's great to discuss. The Stanford report is beautiful about California, and you've got 5 other states that have been doing vote by mail. But in the fall, the election's going to be decided in states that are going to be doing vote by mail for the first time.
Yeah.
And that is, that's a daunting situation here, especially when you understand, as we all do, that we have secretaries of state and election boards whose expressed goal is to make sure that Trump gets back in. So how do we deal with that now? How do we deal with vote by mail in states with aggressive bias doing vote by mail for the first time?
Right. That's something that we did in the other call, prior call. We did get into that a bit more. But one of the things that came up was that these different counties that you mentioned, especially those like Connecticut, for example, where they're so dominantly using in-person voting and rarely using absentee. And then they also have a timeline, as you mentioned, but their timeline is like set up in the Constitution or something, so it's very hard to change. And also they require that the absentees are received by election, close of polls. It has to be received by election day. And whereas here in California, they allow it to be received, postmarked by election day and then received later. And then it go through this whole curing process, which is great. But, expecting these other states that are new to vote by mail to implement these extensive processes to cure missing or mismatched signatures, you're just not going to get it. It's not going to happen for November. And this is why, the original House, the bailout program that was put through the Senate, and, they had provisions in there that were recommended by the House to make vote by mail, mandatory for everybody and so forth. And it was an overreach a bit. And I predicted it would be pulled out, and indeed it was, because it had things like the signature curing and all these things that when we went through it, there just wasn't enough time between getting it and getting all these things done before the deadline, which is sometimes really fast in some of these states of only 14 days. You have to have everything done. So absolutely, I don't know the answer to this. I know that there's another, not this document, we were looking at this specifically because it's one of the best that I've seen in terms of reviewing the situation with how well vote by mail works and all of the issues. But there was another one which was by the legal attorneys, maybe somebody else remembers what it was called, but we did circulate it on the list, and I'll circulate again, but essentially it was the recommendations about how to handle the situation before us for November. And there they took a fairly, I think, reasonable approach of just expanding, making it no excuse vote by mail. And for those states that have, I'm sorry, no excuse absentee, okay, and that they would get there, but probably not changing the deadlines for getting them in, probably not changing the laws in terms of curing signatures and the like. And indeed, some of them would be rejected and so forth more than they are here. But it's just not, their idea was it wasn't reasonable. And of course, then also expanding early voting and still having in-person voting. So it was not saying only vote by mail. It was a mix. But you know, the thing is that vote by mail and these things do thwart many of the vote suppression scams that have been used over the years. The long lines, not enough machines, and so, you know, they are afraid. I think Trump and his crew are afraid of vote by mail. But then again, I think he's putting this up as, you know, setting the stage by saying vote by mail, you can't trust it, so that then when the election comes in and he loses, he can say, oh, it's a vote by mail was untrustworthy and we have all this fraud. And so then he's going to probably, my prediction is say, no, the election was fake news and I'm still the president. And this is the danger that was before us, is we have a guy who is not going to want to leave and who is going to use his media prowess in order to stay in power. So yeah, it's Harvey, you know, Wasserman, you've said it exactly. And so let me pose the question back to you. What do you think is our best choice? What should we do?
Right now, I think we have to produce a clear, reasonably short document on all the pitfalls of vote by mail that can be used as a template in all the states that are now going to get hit with vote by mail, and what can be done so that people in those states know how to approach the situation. I mean, vote by mail is being put forward as this panacea that, you know, at least we get a paper ballot and this and that. But listening to this conversation about, you know, just the signature verification issue could be used to completely steal an election. And we have the problem also with the deadlines, which was, as John Brakey knows, a major factor in Florida in 2018. It could have cost us, you know, the governorship and the Senate seat. And we need, this is a very astute and advanced group here. We need to produce a template of exactly what people in North Carolina and other states that are getting vote by mail for the first time need to look at and need to do to maximize it as a tool of democracy. You know, there are people going to be, the object of the 5 o'clock call on Monday is, or at 2 o'clock here, is to have a national organization with emphasis on the 12 swing states that is going to be prepared to know every nuance of every election on the state level, because this election is going to be decided, as we all know, in the 12 swing states. And so we need organizations in every one of those states that knows every nook and cranny of how the election is going to be administered. And what this group could do, especially with, you know, this Stanford report is great, but it does apply only to California. So we need to look at the 5 states that have been doing vote by mail, and then California and the others, and produce something that people can go into. And there's only 6 months. If we can have this in a month or less, so that people know what they're dealing with and don't go into the election thinking vote by mail is this great answer. They need to know all the ins and outs. I agree with you. It's a lot better than having to deal with 117,000 voting stations with 117,000 different ways of stealing it. But we have to know exactly what people are facing with vote by mail in the states that are getting it for the first time.
Yeah, I'd love to make a suggestion on that. I know we're near the end. Can we submit to you, Ray, just simple sentences on what we would instruct people to do, if possible, to get around some of these things? One of them might be check your signature on your registration card or your latest license and make sure you sign your mail ballot that way. I don't know if that's a practical suggestion, but I know I will be discussing the surrender rule in the mixed situation.
I think that's a great suggestion. I think if people are organizing in the States were to tell the people they're organizing to check your signature, I think that's a great idea.
Well, I don't know if it's available to everybody online. Research is always necessary before you make a recommendation because sometimes they're not implementable, to use a bad word. But Ray, could we submit to you
Of course.
a sentence of what we would recommend as a template?
Yeah, and we started that Google document, of trying to put together something of an idea of pretty much what Harvey's talking about, of how to I don't know if we can have an impact on what's going to be put forward. The group I was working with, the State Audit Working Group, tried to have some impact on the House legislation that was, shit-canned by the Senate. And, of course, it didn't go anywhere. But, as we looked at it, we said, this is severely broken, what they're trying to propose here. And it's only going to cause a huge problem with especially those states that are not used to these kind of delays. And so I think that so there's really two levels here. Mimi, the one you're talking about is working with activists and voters and instructing them of how to make sure that given that they're going to be using vote by mail, how to make sure that it gets in. Another idea is to make sure you drop it off and not use the mail, and don't trust the fact that they might close the post office or something and make it so that it's hard to get it, and then it's late or the postmark wasn't correct. By dropping it off, you have the best of both worlds, where you're not subjecting yourself to standing in line and getting a virus, and you can complete it home and so forth and make sure it gets in.
Well, let me jump in. In Ohio, in Columbus, what they've done in Ohio is there's only one place in Franklin County, which is Columbus, which is 1.5 million people, to drop off a ballot. And it's a completely obscure location. They've done their best to hide it. You really got to know where you're going. It's in an old, an abandoned, Walmart or something. And so we have to be aware of that too. I mean, they're not, in states like Ohio, which have a Republican Secretary of State and a Jim Crow legislature, they're anticipating that. So we have to, I'm not saying anything that you guys don't know, but it won't be easy to do that.
No,
I did it here in LA. It was a piece of cake. There was a school around the corner. I got my absentee ballot. I filled it out. I walked it in on Sunday. They were glad to see me, and that was it. But that's not going to be possible in a lot of other states.
That was a vote center where people already were there. And here in LA, we had some drop-off boxes that people could pick up and walk away with. We had to change that to only locations where there was a human being watching the drop-off thing 24/7. Yes. So, we have to be careful. You don't want to, I'm sure you weren't implying this, Harvey, but, to demand more drop-off locations and have a bad Secretary of State go, sure, we'll give you that, is, we have to rethink everything we recommend. But I'm pretty sure what's going to happen is there are going to be a mix of no excuse vote by mail or mandatory passive vote by mail reception, plus some in-person voting, probably early voting, and that we run into what happens if you don't get your mail ballot. And how do you tell people, watch the dates, start complaining if you don't get it 5 days after the mailing date. And this is tough stuff, even for those of us who spend time online. For people who are not on their computers and don't have smartphones, oh my God, the churches could do some of this work. But anyway, those are the kind of recommendations I would love us to think and rethink and then submit to you, Ray, because I do think this group, more than any other I'm with, would have a fruitful document. I don't think anybody else, you know, Stacey Abrams has a wonderful, well-funded Let Me Vote. And my colleague, Allison Janney, I just saw the ad for it. And it's all, let me vote, give me a mail ballot. But there's nothing beyond that. And it's just, it's so frustrating to me.
Right.
They get all the money and we have this group. But so we'll submit to you, Ray,
Yeah, well, I'll do my best to take any suggestions. And I like the idea of I was trying to say there's two levels. One is what the voter can do, and the other one is what we should do to put pressure on the election officials to do. I know that Harvey Branscombe wants to mention something, but you know, Harvey, you had in Colorado this thing of cameras at the drop boxes. Now, were those, or do you think those would be feasible to set up in counties that are not, you know, underwriting the whole thing, that you could do those sort of as can you do that? I mean, how do those work?
The camera requirement in Colorado just requires any security camera from any distance to have the drop box within view, which really isn't adequate to prevent any kind of fraud that might happen with the drop box, including identifying who stole the drop box by unscrewing it from the pavement or whatever. So,
well, Mimi's right. You have to.
It's a waste of money. Yeah, what can happen and was experimented with in Colorado was to put a cell phone in the drop box with the camera in the drop box that checks what's dropped into the drop box and so forth. All that, I don't think any of that stuff is on the market at the moment, unfortunately, and it's not going to be ready for this virus, but it's definitely stuff that should be done before tens of thousands of drop boxes get put in, and it costs thousands of dollars to put them in place wherever they are, even without the camera, which costs thousands of dollars. So yeah, it's a big investment that's happening, and it definitely takes away from the integrity of attended casting of the ballot, which you actually want, as Mimi just said. And the statement I wanted to make before the end of the call is to pay attention to the printer. And as Reiki said, that Runbeck is a printing house. They print the ballots, they fulfill them, they send them to the post office. That whole thing is not under oversight, that whole process anywhere, as far as I know. Even the officials aren't doing a good job of oversight of the printing, and they do make mistakes. Runbeck themselves have sent the wrong style to voters in Colorado and caused a big mess. And they've also sent ballots that had identifiable numbers on every ballot to everyone in Adams County one time. And so, and there's the potential, if they're printing the ballot, that somebody could actually print a cryptic code onto envelopes or ballots inside that would allow them to be improperly handled later, disappeared from the count or whatever. So there's a lot of danger that's entered into at the printer fulfillment house. And they'd have to do last minute changes because of people changing address at the last minute and changing the style that they're allowed to get. Very complicated, needs to be watched.
I like to remind people
that what Harvey said. This is John Brakey, because Runbeck, in my opinion, does not have a good reputation. They are beyond records request, and they'll tell you that, okay? It's another vendor that has too much influence and power, and their connections and their history points. It's not to people who feel like we do, that we work for social justice and elections that are real.
Okay,
yeah, I'd like to remind people that in 2004, in Ohio, they sent out absentee ballots that did not have John Kerry's name on it. So exactly. Wild stuff can be done.
Oh yeah.
We've had omitted candidates too.
So let Tim White have you have your hand up. Go ahead and say what you'd like. Tim?
Yeah, I had to unmute there. I want to make a pitch for the importance, and this is for all states, but some of the swing states, for the importance of bilingual ballots in this issue rather than the monolingual ballots that they use in say, Washington. When you scroll down and you look through the envelopes at the appendix at the bottom of this, some of them are printed in multiple languages and some of them are just in English. When they know which language you're going to use because they have a record of your preferred language, that allows the people who are reviewing the signatures to look and they know what language this voter has, and they can, by unconscious or conscious bias, make trouble for languages, for signatures in non-English languages.
Yeah,
There are 4 ways that if you have monolingual ballots, that Washington has actually disenfranchised voters. They put the wrong election date printed onto ballots in non-English languages. We caught them doing that. They have dropped the US Congress and local races from non-English ballots. They put the wrong translation of felon reenfranchisement rules on the declaration that you signed, so that if you are looking at it in another language, if you've ever been convicted of a major offense, you can't vote, rather than the actual rule, which is pretty loose. And then making trouble for these non-English signatures.
so were those intentional things, Tim?
Yes, they were. Yeah, we caught them and forced apologies from the Secretary of State's office. They were all tilts, in Washington's case, all tilts towards benefiting Republicans as it happened.
And all called printer's mistake, nothing prosecutable. That's the history usually. Nothing.
That's right. They're all glitches officially. Another thing that's important is you have to be able to have county to county comparisons of the rejection rate by language. That was in the Washington legislature, and the conservative county legislators blocked that from happening, to find out whether in our counties where half of the population are Hispanic, whether or not there is a different signature rejection rate from counties that are all Anglo. Finally, I'd like to
want to
mention,
back up what Tim said, because it's so true. And I just mentioned Broward County. They stole the U.S. Senate race there by ballot design and putting multi-languages on one ballot. Their ballot was 7 pages long, 7 pieces of paper they gave you in some precincts. And the undervote for the U.S. congressional race was 27,000 votes. And when you went down to the governor's race, it was only 5,000. And that is only done by poor ballot design. They got away with it because they can pull this trick every 18 to 20 years, because we use institutional memory of the trick that they did in 2000, okay? It was like a rerun. And, you know, boy, just awful.
Okay, so let's try to wrap it up, because I know everybody has things they need to get to, but let's work on the list. I've been working with getting both Tim and Brad to calm down and not, pollute the list with so much argumentation. I think they're going to be under control now. So, and also Ralph Lopez, I had to put under moderation. So I think we'll have a better venue for talking about this. And then those comments in those 2 categories, we can maybe try to push this forward and distribute something to the states and the activist groups to say, this is where you can have an impact, because I think this is critical. So some of these areas that we mentioned, such as the drop box, maybe we could have activists stationed there to make sure that there isn't any monkeying around with the drop box. Sometimes I know here the ballot boxes, they've stole them, broken them open. I mean, everything you can imagine goes on. So those all ideas, I think we can have a good impact. But I do anticipate, as Harvey said, this is going to be a very challenging election, very challenging. It's going to be basically a cornered losing, someone that doesn't want to lose power, and a party that's losing power, and they are going to struggle very, very hard to stay in power. And it's going to be probably one of the most difficult elections. Plus we have this virus. So it's over the top in terms of the challenge before us. Okay.
If people will, again, I'll remind people to email me, solartopia@gmail, if you want to be on this call on Monday. And also, when you send your suggestions in to Ray, if you can CC me, that'd be great.
Yeah, if you want to just post that to the election integrity at Citizens Oversight, your request for people to attend, if you want to make it universal to the several hundred people on that list, then maybe you'll have, Mimi, go ahead.
I just wondering, are you making this the recording of this call available? And it would be at all right. I think some of the
I'll put it on
excerpts
YouTube.
of
I
this,
think it's a good, it'll be a good one to go over, because we really, we did a good job of taking a look at these issues and discussing and bringing up to the surface some of the key issues that are facing us. And I want to mention that Harvey Wasserman, thanks again for refocusing our attention on the current November election, because I think that was, it's easy to get caught up with looking at the details. And this was a good report. I encourage everybody to read this and study and see what they came up with for California, because we have, maybe one of the most diverse, vote by mail situations. But yes, it does not map exactly into what's before us in November. It just doesn't. It's a completely different situation. But I will recirculate this thing about the Lawyers Guild or whatever it was that made the recommendations. So I thought that was a pretty well-reasoned one for what we're going to do in November. Yeah, Mimi, you have your hand up again.
Oh, Ray, I was just going to say, where is this? And I was just going to ask if it's okay with everybody on this recording that if I do excerpt some of what's been said to illustrate to people. Tim Robbins did call me last night, so I've had a talk with him. This is just looking down the line, awareness for what we're talking about when we do have a recommendation document. Just excerpts from this call are more persuasive than anything I can write. Is that okay? And where will the call be posted?
This is the idea. And the more we get it circulated and people viewing it, so this will be good. I'll put it on YouTube, and then you can easily have people just play, and you can link them into certain spots.
Okay.
Okay, good. Thanks everybody. And stay safe.
Hey, Mimi, will you call me when you're done here?
Yes, I will. Thanks.
Okay, so
Thanks.
Thank you, and everybody safe.
Thank you, Ray.
Wash your
Thank
hands,
you.
etc.
Thank you, John.
Reiki, I love
Harvey,
the
everybody.
video.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.